that one of the reasons MK came into being is because the ANC has not done right by members of Umkhonto weSizwe after 1994.
True.
I do think that Phala will put some stress on whatever coalition is formed. A society that commodifies things like water, things like education, things like healthcare is an uncivilized society. And this is what the DA stands for, in my view, therefore, with its market fundamentalism. The question for me is, what is African about the African National Congress?
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today we are very, very lucky to be joined once again for the second time in 2 weeks by your favorite guest on SMWX, Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi. Gogo, thank you so much for joining us once again. The legend of Matshiqi lives on.
Klubi, Kabako.
Thank you so much. I think the best way to take this conversation, because there's so much to digest, I literally cannot wait. I almost feel like I should just sit back and just allow you to talk for an hour, is maybe in chronological order, because we have the election, we have the coalition talks, we have the parliamentary sitting, and we have a new government, all to think about. Let's start with the election, because the nation is still digesting the earthquake that was the 29th of May. What are your takeaways from this election?
Well, I must say that for me, the closer we got to the election, the more difficult it became for me to separate the political from the personal. The election result itself, I must confess, made me very sad. Actually, I'm still quite sad about what happened. But at the same time, I think our people did the right thing, because they had to punish the ANC for its failures, its weaknesses, empty promises, and arrogance of power. So I am quite sad, which explains in a way why it became difficult for me to countenance the possibility that the ANC would fall below 50%. Because then what happened was, I thought below 50%, that is too sad to contemplate. And as I said, it's one of those moments when I really struggle to separate the personal from the political. As an analyst, what it means is that then I reached a point, especially during our last conversation, when I was struggling to separate analysis from what I desire. Because I certainly did not desire the result the ANC got in the election. Yes, I did warn that if the ANC peaked too late, it would fall below 50%. But if it peaked in time, if it had peaked in time, it would then just cross the 50% threshold. At the time I spoke to you last time, I was still hoping that's what would happen. That even if the ANC peaked too late in the campaign, somehow it would cross the 50% threshold. That was not to be. So I'm quite hurt and very sad. And I think I speak for many of us who grew up in the ANC. And I think I speak for many who were in the military wing of the ANC. Umkhonto weSizwe. As I was coming here, I was thinking in the car that this year actually marks 40 years since I was recruited to the ANC underground.
Wow.
And later recruited to the ANC military underground to be a member of Umkhonto we-Sizwe. That's a long time in one's life. And I must say, I speak for many when I say the election result hit us very hard. But our people did the right thing. And this is why in the article I wrote earlier this week for the Business Day, I start by arguing that actually since 1994, the ANC has been the main force of counter-revolution. And with this election result, the counter-revolution is truly underway. Now, of course, one of the things the counter-revolution produces is the MK party. Now, I am not saying, unlike some in the ANC, that the MK party is a force of counter-revolution. I'm saying, were it not for the fact that the ANC, during the course of the past 30 years, at some point becomes the main force of counter-revolution in the country. One of the byproducts of that counter-revolution is the MK party. Having said that, I must warn that in the decisions leaders of the MK party make, they must be careful not to become a force for counter-revolution in the country. But the MK comes into being for another reason. So last night, I had a discussion with my MK commander. And the last thing I said to him is that we must accept that one of the reasons MK came into being is because the ANC has not done right by members of Umkhonto we-Sizwe after 1994.
True.
They are poor, they are homeless, they suffer from many kinds of psychological and other problems. In my own unit, 2 comrades committed suicide. And when I spoke at the funeral of the second comrade who committed suicide, I said, what we did after 1994 is to go against what we were taught. We were taught that when a comrade falls, we must pick him up and carry him to safety. The ANC did not do that with members of Umkhonto we-Sizwe. Members of Umkhonto we-Sizwe were left in the field of battle to die, a slow and painful death. And this is one of the reasons why the MK party came into being. It's because the ANC did not do right by members of Umkhonto we-Sizwe.
It's amazing to hear you talk, because a lot of the analysis of this election has been about the immediate political consequences for the ANC, but we probably haven't yet fully digested the historical consequence of this election. You know, this is something that we could go back to 1912 and even think about the whole history of the ANC, and this being one of the biggest calamities the party has actually ever faced, to be rejected so resoundingly by the electorate. I was actually looking at the numbers the other day, and to my shock, I realized that when you add the regional and the national ballot together, which is now what takes parties to parliament, the ANC actually got 39.7. So it even fell below 40, which none of us could have thought. And falling in the provinces, I looked at the metros, they're looking very dicey for 2026, you know, all of them. So yes, this is a historical moment in ANC history, let alone South African history.
But we need to go back to Jacob Zuma and what he did. You and I have talked a lot about what he did, placing himself outside the ANC and all of it. There is one thing I wish to add, and it is this. The ANC has been talking about renewal for some time now.
Yeah.
So what does Jacob Zuma do?
Mm.
He takes even the agenda of renewal outside the ANC to locate it in Umkhonto weSizwe.
Hmm.
It is now Umkhonto weSizwe that must perform the task of renewal for the ANC. Effectively, how he positions MK, the MK party, he positions it as a party that by coming into being, it is coming into being to renew the ANC. So to the extent that the election result last week is a function of how the ANC declined and has been declining at several levels, at leadership level, at a moral level, or moral ethical level, in terms of the quality of leadership that it has been deploying at a strategic level, at a tactical and intellectual level. There's a need for the ANC to renew itself at all those levels and other levels. Of course, the main task is to renew its relationship with the so-called motive force of the revolution, the people. And what Jacob Zuma is doing is to suggest that it is the MK part that on behalf of this failed ANC that will renew the relationship between the liberation movement and the people. In other words, he is positioning, as I said in our last conversation, the MK party as the authentic liberation movement, not the ANC. But there's something else that needs to be renewed. There's a need to renew our theory of revolution. I think what the outcome of last week's election suggests is that our theory of revolution needs to be revised. It is outdated, and it must speak to the conditions the liberation movement is going to face going forward, including how it positions itself when it comes to coalition formation and beyond. So there is a need to renew our theory of revolution, to take into account what has happened, why it happened, and to take into account something else, that history is not linear. History is a ceaseless repetition of error, folly, and correction. The past 30 years have been about the errors and folly of the ANC. Renewal must also be about correction, to the extent that history is a ceaseless repetition of error, folly, and correction. The question is whether the ANC will be able to do that effectively. I am not holding my breath. In fact, I can predict that in the next election, the 2029, not 2026, I will not be surprised if the ANC falls even to around 30% actually.
It's amazing that would only be a 9-10% drop in the first place, and it's very, very possible. Gogo, let's come on to the coalitions, because this is the talk of the moment, and you've just led us there in your reflection on the results. I guess where to begin, but as soon as we saw the results clarifying, we immediately saw a kind of stampede in some circles to push for this ANC-DA coalition. Now, on the channel, I think 2 years ago or something, you spoke about how the ANC and the DA were, in many ways, actually two sides of a similar political coin. What do you make of this push for the ANC-DA coalition, and also this use of the markets as a kind of substitute for the democratic will?
Well, let me start with the markets and business. Listening to what market commentators and voices in business have been saying, you would think that the markets and business won a two-thirds majority in last week's election. You know? Of course, there is a core in the ANC establishment but it's quite sensitive to what the markets want. And so if the markets ask them to jump, they ask how high. So there is some support within the ANC establishment for the idea of a coalition with the DA, because that would please their handlers, the markets. Within the DA itself, there is a fear that a DA-ANC coalition may alienate portions of the DA support base, and reverse the gains they made in this election. Remember that in this election, they did not actually grow. They were able to win back portions of the traditional DA base that had morphed to the Freedom Front Plus and so on. So basically today they find themselves where they were in 2014. So there is a fear that if they go into a coalition with the DA, they'll suffer what happened in 2019, when portions of its traditional support base will again morph to parties such as the Freedom Front Plus. I can't say Action SA because I think what you're seeing now with this election is the beginning of the end for Action SA. I might be wrong, but that's what it looks like. But there's something the DA is doing which I find interesting. So the DA effectively is talking about a minority government, that the ANC must set up a minority government. You may remember, Hlubi, that there was a time when, let's say, we are at a construction site. Almost always what you see are black men doing the work, digging holes and all of that. And then you would have a white foreman supervising the black men who are working. The DA is saying the ANC can keep the presidency and ministries. They want key positions that will enable it to perform an oversight function over the ANC. Let me put it in Zulu. So what they want to go by follow man for men and women over the ANC. So they will sit there supervising and performing the oversight function over the ANC. Now, of course, the irony is lost to the DA, as it is almost always to the case, that actually this suggestion is racist. As I say, it's reminiscent of what we used to see during apartheid. Black people doing the work and white people doing the supervising and performing the oversight function over the black people who are working. Effectively, that's what they are proposing. Now, within the ANC, of course, as I said, within the ANC establishment, you have those who are quite sensitive about what the markets want and what big business wants. So an argument has emerged according to which the voters have decided they want an ANC-DA coalition. According to this argument, the DA and the ANC combined won 60% or more of the vote. And so according to this argument, the will of the voters is that the ANC and the DA should go into coalition. Now, Matthew's Posa is correct when he says such a coalition would be a business coalition, not a coalition of the people. And I also think he's correct to suggest that if the ANC goes into a coalition with the DA, they must kiss the 2026 local government elections goodbye. So there is such a fear within the ANC that the next two elections will be difficult for the ANC if it goes into a coalition with the DA. Then there's MK. As I said to you last time, MK has reintroduced the idea that came out after the Morogoro Conference in 1969, when the ANC said the primary reason for the prosecution of the liberation struggle is that of the liberation of Africans in particular, in the context of liberating blacks in general. So the MK party is arguing that what we need is a coalition of black parties. So I suppose they'll be talking about the EFF, ANC, maybe even IFP, ASAPO, PAC, and things like that. You might even want to throw in the Patriotic Alliance in this formulation.
Certainly
of the MK party.
UDM and ATM probably as
UDM
well.
and ATM, and those kinds of parties. The question for me is, what is African about the African National Congress? I struggle to answer that question. Maybe the MK party can answer it when they suggest that you need a coalition of black parties or parties that exist to advance the interests of black people, or even Africans in particular. So I don't know how to answer that question. What is African about the African National Congress?
Thanks for watching SMWX. Before we get back to the episode, I just wanted to let you know the 4 ways that you can help support this channel if you want to see us growing bigger and better to keep you more entertained and informed. The first way is you can invite me to speak at your company, your school, your institution. You'll see the contact details down below. The second way is that you can become a member of this channel. Become a member, or you can give us a thanks. You'll see there's like a heart with a $sign in the ribbon below this video. Buy me and the team some coffee for this episode. The third way you can get involved is you can advertise on the channel. Now, I'd much rather the community of viewers would be advertisers on this channel than me going out to people who don't really know about SMWX and trying to explain it to them. So if you're a viewer and you have a business and you want to partner and you love this platform, let's partner on this channel. And then finally, you can buy merchandise, you can buy books. All this is in the description down below. Now let's get back to the episode. So much to unpick there, and I want to come to the minority government because that seems to be a big question and a big proposal that at least some in both parties seem to be settling on. Of course, there's still a long, long way to go. I've been thinking about this proposition, and I think it's not as clean as some observers and those in the DA think. And the reason is this, is that let's say a minority government is established and, as you say, DA takes oversight roles and they leave the executive to the ANC, and then parliamentary votes, they give support in motions of no confidence and budgets. Outside of motions of no confidence and budgets, by the way, I think motions of no confidence will be very interesting, and we'll see if this agreement survives purely on that. But what stops the ANC from switching to MK and EFF when it's convenient in Parliament? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So what we could then have is that the DA is in Parliament. They think they have this confidence and supply agreement, and they try to veto something. And then ANC says, okay, fine, we'll just go to MK and EFF. So then we have this, and then vice versa. If MK and EFF don't like something, they run back to the DA. So we could have this very unstable. The idea that this is stability just baffles me.
Well,
yeah.
Actually, even before we get there, by the logic of those who are arguing that the ANC and DA combined have won 60% of the vote, and therefore the will of the people is that the ANC and the DA must go into coalition. By that logic, well, actually what should be in place is an ANC, MK, and EFF coalition, what the DA refers to as a doomsday coalition. So you're right. This logic is a bit on the iffy side. And you're right also that nothing stops the ANC in the middle of this DA-ANC coalition process to one day turn around and say, well, let's say on Phala-Phala.
Sure.
Because Phala-Phala is going to be a big headache for the president.
Absolutely.
The ANC does not have the majority in parliament anymore to defend him. And so the question is the DA going to defend Cyril Ramaphosa and vote to the ANC when the ANC wants to defend Cyril Ramaphosa when it comes to Phala-Phala? And of course, if they don't, you are right. they can try and strike a similar deal with MK and the EFF. Now, of course, the EFF is in court challenging the decision of Parliament not to adopt the Section 189 panel recommendation. But we have seen that the EFF can be pragmatic. Because I was listening to Julius Malema on Saturday, and I realized that effectively what he has done is to turn the 7 cardinal pillars of the EFF into pillars of sand. In fact, what we saw is a retreat from the demand that Floyd Shibambu should be the finance minister when he says, we will ask for that if they agree, meaning the ANC. And then he says, Cyril Ramaphosa is not the EFF's problem. Those in MK who today arguing that he must not be the presidential candidate of the ANC had the opportunity when they were in the ANC to kick him out, and they didn't. Now they want to make it the EFF's problem. Now, that's quite an important retreat on the part of the EFF. Of course, it raises questions such as, what is in the interests of Julius Malema? Is it always in the interests of the EFF? In other words, should you always assume that what Julius Malema wants is what the EFF wants? I'm not sure that's the case.
What you say and what's been swirling around in my mind is something that you've said on this channel. I can't remember if it was yours or if you were quoting someone, but you said that...
If it's clever, it was mine.
Oh, well, in that case, it was definitely yours. I think you said that one of the things you realized when you were in MK, or one of the mantras that was presented, was that a battle plan or a strategy very seldom survives contact with the enemy.
I was quoting an Oxford academic who, as part of his consultancy work, had to do work for the British Army. And he said, one general said, no strategy survives contact with the enemy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an apt view on what's happening now, because what we have is parties at the moment figuring out where they stand on issues. But I don't think we've yet got to the point where that view meets contact with other parties and the actual negotiation starts. So we hear the ANC coming out now. I think as we record this, Cyril Ramaphosa is going to give a speech, which we'll see if it happens. But if
talking about Cyril Ramaphosa giving a speech this evening, he is not going to announce what some people are praying for, that he will resign. As both ANC president and head of state, that's not what he's going to announce. But let me add something else on the note of strategy. All strategies, including the strategies behind coalition formation at the moment, all strategies have the same defect. They all assume that those who design the strategy are as rational as they are. It's a very big defect of all strategy. There's something else that strategies don't take into account. That what lies between a strategy and its seamless execution is reality.
Absolutely.
Back to what the general said, that no strategy survives contact with the enemy.
Let's go there, because there's contact with the enemy in terms of the negotiating table and seeing which proposals, can actually find consensus. And I think there's much less consensus than people are assuming now. So we'll see lots of different stories coming out of this. And when the ANC says they're going to announce the future, what they may be forgetting is they no longer can announce the future, because their coalition strategy depends on what the partners do. It's that simple. But then there's contact with the enemy in terms of whatever coalition we get, reality will soon meet that government with several difficult crises that we can't predict now. And I heard Professor Baso Ndenze on TV the other day saying something very perceptive and astute, which is that what will define whatever coalition we get is not the disputes and the discussions of today. It's the disputes and discussions of tomorrow that we can't predict. What if there's a global crisis and China goes to war with Taiwan?
Yeah, exactly.
Then does the ANC and DA coalition hold? So I'm not sure that the parties are thinking that far in advance of how this coalition needs to be durable as well.
Well, in the very short term, and I think by the very short term, I'm talking about the time it will take for the different political parties to negotiate a coalition. In that very short term, the likelihood is that domestic policy is going to trump foreign policy. But going forward, as you say, problems may emerge, tensions may emerge around foreign policy. And as Israel and Palestine,
absolutely,
Ukraine,
absolutely,
Taiwan,
even Zimbabwe, Eswatini, even closer neighbors, there could be sharp disagreements there.
Exactly. And talking about the future, what this election has taught us is that a growing number of South Africans, maybe even the majority today, if you look at the fact that the ANC got 40% of the vote, have reached a point where they can imagine our future with or without the ANC. With the election result, what they're telling us is that they are ready to imagine their future without the ANC. And so looking forward, we must remember that two things are very unpredictable. It is the past and the future. So both the past and the future are unpredictable. And their unpredictability will affect the content, will have an effect on the content of coalition formation negotiations at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think of Phala Phala as one of those crises. We know in 3 months there's going to be a big court case. And no matter which way that goes, Phala Phala is going to be front and center. Politicians are going to be asked questions. If a coalition can't even prepare for the next 3 months, so surely all the negotiating parties have to figure out what they're going to do with Phala Phala, because if they don't, they're gonna be surprised before they've even got out of the gates. Well,
they have an option. You can have a coalition arrangement that uses this arrangement, its majority. Of course, it will be a coalition arrangement that includes the ANC, that uses its majority to legalize opening a bank account in a couch.
Oh, yeah, you could just quickly change the law.
Yeah. Of course, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think that Phala Phala will put some stress on whatever coalition is formed.
Gogo, let's come to the other configurations, because there are at least two others that we need to consider. The one is one that still doesn't include MK, but still includes the EFF. So something like EFF, ANC, IFP, for example, or plus one other. That's another option that is on the table that maybe people haven't spoken about as much as MK or DA. What do you make of that possibility?
Well, I think the DA would be loath to accept the inclusion of both or either MK or the EFF. So that leaves us with ANC, EFF, but ANC, EFF don't have enough seats between them. So they'll have to look in the direction of smaller parties like the Patriotic Alliance.
Or the IFP.
Or look in the direction of MK, as you say, which of course the markets won't accept.
Or maybe IFP.
Yeah, or maybe IFP. So an ANC, IFP, EFF coalition will be interesting in terms of managing the ideological tensions between the ANC and EFF on the one hand, despite the fact that actually the ANC is actually what I would call left-light. Despite that,
Yeah.
there would be tensions between the IFP on the one hand and the ANC and EFF on the other.
Yeah.
To be interesting to see how they manage those tensions. Yeah.
What do you make of calls for a government of national unity as well? We've seen, as we speak, that seems to be the ANC's opening position after the National Working Committee. Do you think such a thing could work? And how do you react to this proposal?
Well, that proposal shows you just how potent a force, a political force, nostalgia can be. Because for me, this is about the nostalgia of the birth of the Rainbow Nation and all of that. Of course, what that presupposes is that you go against what the DA did in burning the flag, when people argued that what the DA is doing is undermining unity. And as I said to you, what unity? You know? So it's nostalgia. People think a government of national unity will take us back to that kumbaya moment of the government of national unity of 1994. The same tensions we've been talking about, let's say between the ANC and the DA, or between the ANC, IFP on the ANC, EFF on the one hand, and IFP, would still need to be managed.
Yeah.
So ideological tension and policy tensions will still have to be managed, even in the context of a government of national unity. In other words, setting up a government of national unity does not solve the question of what really divides this country. What really divides this country are conflicting conceptions of what constitutes a civilized society. For instance, in my view, a society that commodifies things like water, things like education, things like healthcare is an uncivilized society. And this is what the DA stands for, in my view, therefore, with its market fundamentalism. They're simply asking us to become, we're already there in many respects, an uncivilized society. That tension will still remain, even if you form a government of national unity, because that, for me, is the main fault line that divides us. What is it that constitutes a civilized society? Now, of course, I think I've spoken to you about the fact that because of colonialism and apartheid, what in essence is a numerical minority has become a cultural majority whose worldview, ways of seeing, ways of being, and ways of doing have become the dominant reality in South Africa. And those who are the numerical majority have become a cultural minority whose ways of seeing, ways of being, and ways of doing and worldview are subordinate to those of the cultural minority, but in essence is a numerical minority. Now, of course, our idea of what constitutes a civilized society is an idea that is propounded in the main by the cultural majority.
If you were advising the ANC, Gogo, or I guess another way of putting it is, how do you see the internal politics of the ANC? Because I think that's going to be a fundamental question going forward. There's a potential that this could make divisions in Polokwane look like a bring and bri.
No, it will make the current divisions that we may see as the factionalism worsens, will make Polokwane look like a pillow fight at a convent.
Yeah, because at least in Polokwane, even Nasrec, the ANC always knew that it had national power to fall back on, and it could placate different factions through its power.
Yeah.
Now it can't do that.
Yeah, its power patronage, amongst other things, is quite reduced now. Yeah.
And it seems to me, whichever way the ANC goes, if they go MK, EFF, or some combination, if they go DA, there's a threat, there's an internal threat of internal pushback and possibly, in the worst case scenario, splits.
Well, I think a DA ANC coalition will test the political management capacity and leadership position of Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah.
I think it will be very difficult for him to manage the ANC and retain the kind of control he has been able to win over the past 2 years, especially when it comes to the leadership structures of the ANC. So it will be very difficult for Cyril Ramaphosa to maintain his current position as far as managing the ANC is concerned. In fact, we spoke about this the last time and said that his opponents or enemies within the ANC have two options. Either they kick him out at the next conference in 2027, or they kick him out now. I think, as I'm hearing already, the discussion is taking place about the need to change leadership. And this is code for the removal of Cyril Ramaphosa. I think the rebellion to effect his removal would be a rebellion about removing him much sooner, before the 2027 National Conference of the ANC. I think the push would be to remove him as head of state as soon as possible and do some kind of renewal and re-engagement between now and the next conference of the ANC and the 2029 elections. So I think his position is quite precarious at the moment, and it's going to get more precarious. As I said, what political parties do, they will tolerate a leader and defend such a leader until he becomes a threat to the individual careers of people in the party. Ramaphosa is approaching that point.
Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel. So why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. Yes, and it's going to be, I think, the thing to watch. The first question to watch with any new government for me is going to be, well, if Ramaphosa gets theirs, how long will the president survive? Can we come on to MK in this sense, Gogo, in terms of, I used to watch your interviews when other people would interview you and I was a young university student. And you used to give interesting advice to presidents and leaders. Now, what would you advise MK in this moment? Because it's clear that on the one hand, they've got an extremely passionate support base, which is very much behind the party and very much behind President Zuma. However, that accounts for 14% of South Africa. There is a segment of South Africa that's sitting on the sidelines and just doesn't know what to make of MK. And then there's another segment that is fearful, that is worried, that thinks MK represents a dangerous authoritarian turn in our politics. What would you advise MK in this moment?
Let me respond by touching on what the SACP said yesterday. Two things. The SACP says MK is a counter-revolutionary force. It's quite interesting that they don't see what a counter-revolutionary force the ANC has become.
That's true.
I find that very interesting. And they say MK is an ethno-nationalist force.
Yeah.
Alakwete Mandasha, who says MK is a product of Zulu tribalism, which I found disappointing. The reason why I prefer to talk about a Zulu nationalist impulse instead of tribalism is because there is a need for us to problematize the word tribe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, there is a need for us to problematize the word tribalism in the same way that we must problematize words such as traditional.
Sure, absolutely.
Not so long ago, we had a traditional cause. Now you ask yourself, are we saying that that which is indigenous is on the periphery? The center is the West. So when you use terms like tribe, you lend legitimacy to the idea that the West and Western thought constitute the center, because it is the colonial mind which has imposed this problematic term tribe on us and tribalism. So I was disappointed with how Kwete Mantashe was, with how uncritical Kwete Mantashe was in using this term, tribalism. But one of the first things I would advise MK to do is to make sure that they don't prove him right. And secondly, as I've already said, they must not become a force for counter-revolution. They must start preparing for power. In other words, the question they must ask is, what is our path to power? Because if they play their strategic cards right, they actually can, within the next 2-3 elections, win more than 50% of the vote. But if they become a force for counter-revolution, or a force that proves Kwete Mantashe right, that will be difficult to do.
Yeah.
But they have KwaZulu-Natal. They can use KwaZulu-Natal to show what MK can do for our people. So KwaZulu-Natal can actually be their test case to show South Africa what MK can do. There's something else they must avoid. They must avoid a situation that I find worrying. So every time they are asked, what's your view on this policy? What's your view on that position? The answer is, Ubaba, meaning Jacob Zuma, will tell us. That is worrying, because they must not fall into the same trap many political parties have fallen into in this country. In this country, there's an authoritarian streak that cuts across the political spectrum. The party leader becomes the center. They must avoid that and truly become a democratic formation. And so that they give us an example of the kind of things they will do to deepen our democratic experience as citizens. If at the level of their internal democracy, citizens have doubts about whether they're a truly democratic formation, they will doubt whether they can deepen their democratic experience going forward, and if they become the ruling party of the country. So the advice I would give them is, to the extent that they want to be a counter-hegemonic force in relation to the ANC, that is not enough. They need to be an auto-hegemonic force and posit a vision for the future of this country that is free from their twists with the ANC. Because it won't be enough for them to position themselves only as something that should exist in contradistinction to the ANC. In my view, that would be a very low standard to aspire to.
Gogo, we've got 14 days. Well, it's now 10 or so, I think, to go. And then we've got this massive sitting in Parliament. Any thoughts on the election of the president? We don't know. It looks like it's going to be Ramaphosa as we sit here, but we don't know who it's going to be, and we don't know, more importantly, what could happen at that sitting. It's going to be maybe the moment where we all as South Africans realize how different our politics has become.
Well, what will happen at that sitting? I thought it would help. In this way, I look at section 46.1, which talks about the constitution of the National Assembly.
Yeah.
And says the National Assembly shall consist of not less than 350 members and not more than 400.
Yeah.
Some have used section 63 to suggest that a correct interpretation of section 53 is that all you need in the sitting that will elect the next president is a third. And what they are doing is to counter what the MK party is saying. The MK party is saying they are not going to attend that sitting, and therefore that sitting will not have a quorum. And because it will not have a quorum, it can't elect the next president at that sitting. This is what I thought you would have.
Yes. I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong on that. I think members of the National Assembly are already members before they get sworn in, because I think there's this question of, if they don't get sworn in, are they members? And in which case, if they're not members, then the National Assembly doesn't have 350. But my initial reading of the Constitution is that you are a member once you get elected into Parliament and your party has sent you there and you've been duly elected. But swearing in only allows you to perform the functions of an MP. So that's my reading, and I take it especially from Schedule 2, which is where the oath is outlined. And there it says members of Parliament must swear an oath. So it seems to me that the Constitution foresees that you're already a member. And it makes sense to me because what is being sworn in if not a member? Otherwise, a citizen could just walk in and be sworn in. However, even if I'm right, doesn't mean that MK can't test that proposition. So maybe they'll want to test the proposition and see, is it true, is it not true, is my interpretation right, is it wrong? So yes, we could well have, depending on what MK legal minds.
Well, here's the question. I'm usurping your position now. So you are a member of the National Assembly, even if you have not been sworn in. So those on the list, different lists, are members even before they're sworn in. Are you and I members?
Are we members
of the National Assembly?
No, we're not members. We're not members. But we're not on the list. So that would be my... You can only be a member if your party has been elected and you're on the list to go to the National Assembly. Yeah. So, so we're not members.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can't wait for a court case on this.
Can you? Well, that could well be. And then the funny thing about this scenario is that we only have 14 days. So what happens if there's a court case that concludes after the 14 days?
Well, you see, back to an earlier question about advice to the MK part. So the EFF must ask itself, what explains its decline in this election? Could it be that some of the optics of what it was doing in Parliament alienated a certain portion of the electorate and militated therefore against it improving on what it garnered in 2019? In other words, what the MK party must ask itself is whether the kind of antics that we saw with the EFF, are they going to be the kind of antics they engage in? Are they going to, let's say, at this first sitting?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big question.
Are they going to do an EFF and cause chaos?
Can I raise the levels of anxiety higher.
Yes.
Who will be presiding over that sitting? None other than Chief Justice Zondo. And we know that MK and former President Zuma are not the best of friends. So never mind disrupting the president. Will they disrupt the Chief Justice?
By the way, on whether Zondo and Zuma are friends, one of them is lying, in my view. I don't know whether it's Zuma's lying, Zondo's lying, but one of them is lying.
Yeah. Imagine MK decides to disrupt Zondo before he even starts the... Sorry, I don't want to give people ideas, but...
I think that cat is already out of the bag.
Yeah.
If I were MK, I would be thinking,
Okay, I withdraw. Chair. But these are the... And as you say, I think that is such a big question is, what will be the character of MK in Parliament? Will they... And for me, this is maybe the question of parliamentary politics going forward, because the EFF was able to create massive disruption from 25 seats in their first election.
Yeah.
Now, together with MK, they have over 100 seats.
Yeah.
That kind of force could collapse Parliament if it chooses to.
Exactly.
Which is also why I'm worried about an ANC-DA coalition, because you're then gifting the entire opposition territory to ANC, to EFF, MK. And can you only imagine what they will do with that?
Well, as the Chinese say, may we live in interesting times.
Yeah, I think we can times just get less interesting at this stage. I've just been joking with friends and family that the anxiety is so high, I'm just taking this one day at a time because I can't think beyond the next 24 hours. Gogo, as we conclude, what about the new government? Because, there's been so much talk about the politics and it's interesting who will be in power and all of that. But at the end of the day, we have a government that really needs to deliver. And any coalition, in my mind, no matter who forms it, will be weak if the government fails very quickly to demonstrate some kind of achievement. And I think this has been part of the weakness of Ramaphosa's political project, is that he just hasn't got the governance runs on the board to legitimize his presidency. What do you make of a new government, and what can a new government do, whatever that government is, to reassure South Africans to chart a way forward that restores hope in the future?
Well, whatever configuration of the coalition we get, you are right. Inherently, that government will be weak as part of a weak state. But last time I said to you, whatever government we get, we must remember that it will be in the context of a neo-apartheid state, with many features of the colonial architecture, of apartheid colonialism remaining in place. So one of the major tasks facing the next government is to put South Africa on a path that moves it away from the current reality of neo-apartheid. I can't conceive of any configuration of the coalition that is coming that will succeed in doing that. Unfortunately, I can't.
Well, let's hope that either this government or some government someday rises to that test. But Gogo, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I know that we often space out our conversations, but about 2 years has already happened in the last week. So yes. We really appreciate your time and your insights and your thoughts and sharing them with the family of this channel.
Towaza Hlubi. Magwande.
Magwande, indeed. Thank you for sharing this time with us. Like, share, comment down below. Leave some comments for Ugogo as well. And let's continue to unpack and analyze South African politics on SMWX. Aye. Subscribe now.